Hey there! I'm Dr. Ashwini Bapat, a caregiver coach with a Pine EMD and a palliative care physician. And today you're joining us on Coffee with the Coaches. This is where we share inspiration, stories, tips, and strategies to help you care for your loved ones, whether that's your parent, your in laws, whoever that is, while also making sure to take care of yourself. And if you haven't already, make sure to grab your free copy of 10 Powerful Questions Caregivers Should Be Asking Their Medical Team. You can snag your copy at www.epinemd.com/10 questions, print it out, then bring it to your loved one's next appointment. All right, so today we have with us Christina Keys. She cared for her mother for almost a decade, and she now empowers caregivers and businesses through education and training, and through her business, Keys for Caregiving. She's a public speaker, a master community builder, a change agent, a collective visionary, a storyteller, and of course, a caregiver. So before we get started, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you'll always be in the know when we come out with a new helpful video. So Christina, thank you so much for being here.
So excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I want you to actually take us back and tell us about your caregiving journey and what that was like for you.
Yeah, it was quite the adventure. Like many of us, I had no idea I was going to become a family caregiver. It was 2013. I was at the height of my tech career, very independent, and my mother was also very independent. I played on three softball teams, great long-term relationship, all kinds of fun stuff going on. And called my mom one morning. We were chatting on the phone. She was telling me how she had been out to the movies with a friend the night before, and I was talking to her about some stuff. And I said, "Well, I'll call you back later this afternoon." And I was in the grocery store shopping with my personal trainer because at that time I could do that, right? And I got this call at 3:42 p.m. saying my mother had had a massive stroke. She wasn't expected to live. So I drove up to the hospital, which was 3 hours away, and I walked in the room. My mother's in ICU and hooked up to life support. And for the first 30 days, they gave her like 1% chance to live from minute to minute. We had no idea. Um, if she was going to make it. What had happened was she was at her house and she passed out. She was only 62 years old. She hit her head on the side of the couch on the arm, had a
Wow.
massive stroke, and it left her paralyzed on one side with multiple medical complications. I lived in that hospital with her for probably about 3 months. And when I say lived, I slept in that wonderful hospital chair many caregivers have slept in. I lived out of a suitcase and I drove home once a week to take a shower. And then they let me wheel her out of that hospital. And she was paralyzed and from on one side. And all they had given me is one little sheet of paper that had some senior living locations and in-home care agencies, but didn't explain what in-home care agencies can do, the cost, and most importantly, that it wasn't covered by insurance. And so I instantly went from being a career woman to a family caregiver. And I didn't even know I was a family caregiver. Frankly, I was just a daughter who was afraid her mother was going to die. And that started our journey. I came home and I was thrown into being a case manager, a med tech, a PT, an OT, a CNA, all of these things I had absolutely no training for. I mean, if you had asked me how to build a server or, what software or desktop or laptop you could use, I could tell you that. But how to change an adult brief, put together a hospital bed, manage meds, hire caregivers, I had no idea, but I had to learn it. Just like many of us caregivers do in the middle of that crisis, we have to learn. And about 3 years into that journey, it was February of 2017. Mom had her stroke March 16th of 2013. So it was about 3.5 years. And she had been going to so many hospital visits and doctor's visits that by February of that year, I'd used all my vacation time, all 2 weeks of it, all my sick days. And so I had to leave my career. And I remember my last doctor's appointment I went to, uh, I don't know what happened. I think when I found out I was going to be caring for my mom, I stopped even paying attention to myself because I wasn't sleeping. I was sleeping 5 to 10 hours a week, maybe. I wasn't eating right. I had completely let myself go. I was always in a massive state of stress and fear. And if I didn't get it right, my mother was going to die. And I went to that last doctor's appointment and they said, "Hey, your body's literally shutting down. You've gained like 100 pounds. You now have diabetes, high blood pressure. We don't expect you to live even 6 months if you keep going the way you're going." And so now I was faced with, how do I take care of my mother and give her quality of life, and how do I save my own life? And so I had to learn how to do that. I had to, learn how to do self-care on a whole different level. And while I was doing that, I had to leave my career, and I had to go through a very hard time because I was paying for my mother's care, right? And that was anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000 a month, unexpected right away, right? I lost all my 401k that I had saved my whole life, and um, I had to leave my job. I wound up working 5 part-time jobs, contract work, had to go give plasma for money, had to do things that I had never done in my life before, like visit food banks, and tap into some resources in the community to help myself survive just so I could take care of my mother. Our journey lasted for almost 10 years to December 28th of 22, when my mother came home on hospice in November of that year. And she I walked with her through that end of life journey as well. And that was there were so many things about caregiving that were unexpected, and so many emotions I wasn't prepared for. And once I got those jobs and changed my career, I did go into the senior and retirement industry. I wound up starting a hyper local nonprofit that was very, very successful called Loving Them Forward, got national recognition. And then I wound up working for a national company where I went all across the United States building family caregiver support communities, worked with well over, almost 150 family caregivers across the United States, and empowering them not only to build community where they lived, but also to use their voice. And while I was doing this, I was also doing a lot of speaking and advocacy work for other companies. And one thing led to another, and I was able to create my own business, obviously Keys for Caregiving. But, you know, none of that stuff was expected. I had no formal training. I had no idea what to do. I just, it's like all of us family caregivers do. We just step in and do it for love, and we learn on the fly. And it's interesting because for a while there, I wasn't working full time. I was working those 5 part-time jobs, contract jobs. And I thought, man, what am I going to do now? This is a whole new industry. I'm never going to be able to, make the money like I did before. I'm never going to be self-sustaining and all this other stuff. And little did I know, and just like many other family caregivers, I had no idea I was, building on so many skills that I didn't have before, like my multitasking skills, my crisis management skills, like all of these, my research skills, all of these things were, becoming more and more just stronger in my personality and on my resume. And I just thought I was caregiving, but caregiving changed my life. It changed me for the better. It gave me a much better relationship with my mother. My mother, as I was growing up, she was my abuser. And
Mhm.
so I had to learn a lot about forgiveness. I had to learn a lot about boundaries and not setting boundaries with her. And so, yeah, it was quite the journey, not only for caregiving, but also learning a whole different level of love, learning a whole different type of relationship with my mother, and learning a whole different type of relationship with myself, and really testing the boundaries of what I thought I was capable of.
I
So,
think that's incredible. Your caregiving journey lasted about 10 years.
mm,
And I think a lot of caregivers find themselves kind of unceremoniously dropped into the role of caregiver overnight.
right,
And a lot of them, just like you, have to, they either go part-time or they end up leaving their job completely. And obviously that has financial repercussions for them.
absolutely.
And a lot of them experience health complications themselves from the caregiving themselves because caregiving is incredibly stressful. It's physically demanding, it's emotionally demanding. If you're only sleeping 5 to 10 hours a week, you can
Right.
imagine the toll that that takes on your body. So I was actually wondering, and in those 10 years, you built so many skills.
Mhm.
And I was actually wondering, when you were in kind of the thick of the caregiving role, what were some of the resources that you reached out to get more support, to get more help? Because most caregivers I've met that I've talked to, they just can't get enough in-home hands-on help that they really need.
Right, right. Well, the first thing I did, because I didn't know about the home care agencies. So honestly, what I thought was if you had one of those, they had to be there 24/7.
Mm,
And my mom didn't want that. I didn't want that. And frankly, once I found out that insurance did not cover, Medicare did not cover in-home care, that would have been out of the question. Little did I know, you do not have to have 24-hour care for in-home agencies. And there's so much more than they can do than just, care for that loved one, And so I actually put an ad on Facebook. It was funny because this is how out of touch I was with all of this. It came up in my memories the other day. My first post on Facebook was, hey, does anybody know if they have anything like babysitters, but for adults? I didn't even know to call it a caregiver or a
mm,
CNA. And here I was, these things.
mm,
And so I put something on Facebook to ask if anybody could help out. And I wound up, hiring some people from there that my friends knew. And occasionally I would bring in people from an agency for 3 to 4 hours, a week, and then I had to think about support, right? For me, right? And I just went on social media and typed in caregiver and found some groups there. Now I know that there's different ways to find support in my community. I thought, the reason why I almost died is because I was relying on the medical system. That
mm,
list they gave me of senior living, that was not an option for my mom. You can't just put your loved one in a home that costs thousands of dollars a month, right? Um, and it's not covered by insurance. And the in-home care, I didn't think I could afford that because I thought it was 24 hours. And the reason why I almost died is because I was trying to do it all on my own.
mm,
And I was going to the doctors and nurses and asking them, like, every time I go to the doctors or the hospital, is there any, resources, or what do I do? I was asking questions. And even when I was really tired, I was diligent about saying, can I record this on my phone? Because I'm really tired and your information is valuable. But the thing is, although the doctors are wonderful and the nurses are wonderful and they saved my mother's life, their job is not to be going out into the community and finding resources, right? So they are in that hospital, they are patient focused, right? And so no fault to theirs, but I was asking the wrong people, right?
mm,
And so when I finally changed my careers and found all these resources, just like myself, many family caregivers across the United States think there are no resources in their own town. And there are many, there are hundreds, right? And what I had to do was once I found one, I had to say, hey, is there any other resources that you know here that might be helpful? And I found a really wonderful nonprofit called Caring Closet that gave away free used medical equipment. And that was a game changer because Medicare only covers one piece of medical equipment every 5 years. My mother needed a hospital bed, a walker, a wheelchair, a transfer wheelchair, all of these things. And also adult briefs. Adult briefs were costing us $100 a month. And so I got those for free now. And so those were some of the resources I used, but the social media group where I was finding support, I was dying inside I thought I was failing every day. I was exhausted every day. I was going through so much grief every day, so much loss every day, not only for, with my mother, but for myself, because there's two of us on the care journey. There's a person we care for, and it's okay for us to have an identity and emotions on that care journey as well. And I remember that first group. Um, all of these things that were just humiliating because I had, of course, like many caregivers, started isolating. People didn't understand. I couldn't just go to coffee anymore, and I couldn't go to the movies anymore, any of those things. And I remember looking on that group, and so many people were going through the same things I had gone through, whether it be dealing with the isolation, dealing with, medical teams who were not including you as part of that team when you went into the hospital visit, or, embarrassing toileting incidences with, someone that we were caring for. So it was really great to finally have that, and I really needed that. And that peer to peer support
Yeah.
was so, so important because although there are many wonderful people out there who give great advice, they think, right?
Mm.
Um, Unless they've gone through that journey, they don't understand. And they would say things like I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm so tired, or I'm so stressed, or I'm so worried. They would say things like, well, you need to think about your mom, what she's going through. It's like, oh my goodness, I am literally thinking about my mother 24/7. I am giving my life, my income, my health, my free time, everything to my mother. I am thinking about her, but I get an identity too. And so that well was really dry until I went to peer-to-peer support. And I could say things like, I love my mother, but I want to quit my job as a
Yeah.
caregiver, right?
Yeah.
Or my mom's driving me crazy, or oh my gosh, if I have to tell her one more time to drink or shake, I'm going to lose my head, right? And they understood, and I was able to do that, blow off some steam, and then come back to my mother and be a better caregiver for her. So that support piece was so important. And nowadays we're really fortunate with things like Caregiver Action Network that has a hotline and can help you find different support groups. Daughterhood, which has virtual support groups. Hope Dementia Support Group, which also has in-person and virtual support groups. Great podcasts, like Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver, Happy Healthy Caregiver, great podcasts like that. We're very, very fortunate. A lot of them were there before, but we didn't know to look.
Yeah.
So, I encourage, any caregiver who's out there, do like I did. Once you find one thing, ask, is there
Mhm.
something else? And if you're not talking to somebody and you're on a website like, yours, for instance, there's going to be links to other places that can help you, and other companies too that can be a resource. So,
I think that's so powerful because I think that isolation that happens for caregivers is so real. I do think the healthcare system, as a physician, I know that till I stepped outside of the hospital and clinic setting, I didn't even know all of these support groups, all of these Facebook groups, social media groups, podcasts. I didn't even know they existed. So when there were people who came in with their loved one and you could tell they were exhausted, um,
mhm.
I didn't even know who to refer to.
Right, right.
Um, and so I don't know if I was as helpful in those settings then as I think I am now. So for someone who is in the thick of it and is looking for a community, would you say like starting with a Facebook group would be a good way, like a local Facebook group, or I know that there are like councils on aging in local communities that may be a good place to just reach out to and be like, hey, I'm going through this. What resources have you found helpful?
Yeah, I would say first thing would be, contact Caregiver Action Network
Yeah.
on their hotline, see if they know of any support groups that fit your needs, because, some of us are caring for somebody with Alzheimer's, stroke patients, ALS, cancer, all these different things. Definitely connect to their website. That happens to be one of my favorite ones. Also for support, I would look on social media, look up the word caregiver. Now, listen, I understand that some of us are care partners. Some of us are just caring for loved one, or some of us are just caring for someone in our life. If it's somebody who has been our abuser before and now we're caring for them. We certainly don't think of it as caring for a loved one at times, right? Depending on where you are in your, journey with them. But definitely look on social media for caregiver support. I would say check out, resources on your page. Check out Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver. They have a lot of great links. There are podcasts. It has a lot of stories. Happy Healthy Caregiver is another one, and also, my website as well. But and you can also, if you're in like a rural area, let's say you're in a rural area where there might not even be a lot of internet service, right? If there is a community center, right, you can check with that community center to see if there's any senior centers, if there's any special need resources, because those people, you can ask them, hey, do you know of any caregiver support? And it might just be Sally Sue who comes once a week to the rec center and has a support group, right? So, check with those things, check with your local libraries. A lot of times they'll have a care corner. But for sure, you want to start, with social media online with some of the folks that I've talked about, and, build that community, and I know that we can't always, I mean, frankly, let's be honest. If we have like an hour and a half free, which is what it would take to go to a live peer-to-peer support group, I think most of us at first would just spend that in our car crying, I mean, that's the
Yeah.
truth of it, right? And so a virtual meeting might be easier for us. And there's many, many of those virtual meetings where people are going to understand, right? And also, if you can't get to a virtual meeting, podcasts are a really great way for people to hear their story, right? Those social media groups where people are posting in private groups are a really great way for you to not feel so alone, because you aren't alone. Caregivers, it's so interesting because I thought I was the only person going through this, right? And we are not the only person going through that. There are 53 million family caregivers across the United States, plus those were pre-pandemic numbers. And like in my town, I live in a town, my county has over 500,000 residents. There are
Mm.
49,500 known family caregivers.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
I was sitting here thinking I was alone.
Mm.
Everywhere you go, if you work in an office, I guarantee 17 to 23% of those people are family caregivers. They might not be talking about it, right? If you're in a church, right? A church, like same thing. You're going to have at least 10% of that church, if not more, are family caregivers. You can also check with your churches on some of the bulletin boards or some of the pastors who do counsel there, see if they have anything for family caregivers or small groups. But it's really, really important. And I'll tell you why. For me, once I found that support, again, doing it on my own, I got to a place to where I almost died, right?
Yeah.
And the stats for family caregivers are, 35% of family caregivers pass before the person they're caring for. 30% of family caregivers pass within 5 years of the person they're caring for passing. And if they're over 70, 65% of them pass, right? And because of the stress, because we're not taking care of ourselves, once I started to find that support, once I started to find not only the community resources, but the peer-to-peer support, it's almost like I felt like I could finally breathe a little bit, right? And here's the deal. If you can't do it for you, if you cannot give that gift for
Mm.
you, then give it to the person that you're caring for. Because what happened is the more I was able to find support for myself, the better care I gave to my mother. And as family caregivers, we get so wrapped up in, I've got to do everything right. I've got to, what happens if I don't? They're going to die, And so if at first that's your only motivation is you're doing it so you can be a better caregiver for the person you love, then do that until you believe that you are going to be benefited from that support, because you will. It was a game changer. I went from almost dying, having to leave my job, very, very unhealthy, to being able to create a whole new career, lose all the weight, get healthier than I ever was before. I mean, if you look at my pictures now,
Mm.
compared to my pictures from 2017, I look 10 years younger, and I've aged,
Yeah.
many, many years. So, and it's just because I was able to find that. But what I can tell you in finding support, we have to redefine what we consider support is,
Mm.
right? We have to redefine what our life is, because a lot of times we are comparing our life to our life that we had before, right? And so in our minds, we're going to constantly be failing, right? So
Mm.
if we redefine normal for us, it gives us an opportunity to breathe. It gives us an opportunity to look outside the box and find the resources and help and support we need.
So you actually kind of shared this a little bit earlier, because not everyone, like you said, is caring. Not everyone has the best relationship with the person
Right.
that they're caring for. They
Right.
may have had a history of physical abuse, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. That person may actually still be abusing them in some way, but they
Right.
are in that position of trying to care for them as best as possible. So what is kind of your advice in terms of how you care for that person, while also trying to care for yourself? And what boundaries do you put in place? How do you maintain them?
Absolutely. Well, first thing I want to say to anybody who's caring for someone who was your abuser before you started caring for them is you do not have to care for them. Unless it's a child under the age of 18, right? And you're legally bound to do that. You, there is no law that says you have to care for your mother, your spouse, your ex-spouse. I actually care for my ex-boyfriend now, still too. I have since 2019, right? Um, you don't have to do that. It is a choice, right? But it's important to know that it is definitely going to be something that you're going to have to invest in your self-care because before my mother I became her caregiver. I went through years and years and years of counseling. I went through years and years of, group therapy, and I learned how to set boundaries. And before my mom's stroke, I could say, Mom, if you do this, I'm going to do this. When she started to be, the physical abuse stopped when I was 15 years old, right? I left home at 15 years old, right? And so the physical abuse stopped at that point. So it had been a long time since the physical abuse, but the mental and emotional abuse, and sometimes the financial abuse, right? Those things continued, right? And so I had done a lot of therapy to be able to have a relationship with my mother because I did want to have a relationship with my mother. And I really had to come to terms with whether my mom was a good mom or not. I
Mhm.
wanted to be a good daughter, right? And so I had already done that. I had to go through forgiving my mother as a woman first, right?
Mhm.
Letting her be a woman because I wasn't allowing her to be a woman. She was a mom and she should get it right, just like all the moms on TV. She should have nothing going on inside. She shouldn't have an identity other than my mom, right? And so I had to forgive her as a woman first. And as I got older and became a woman, I saw the challenges I went through. And so that allowed me to see what she actually did do and the things she accomplished as a woman. So then I had to forgive her as a mother,
Mhm.
right? And that forgiveness was not, I had to redefine forgiveness too, right? Because I used to think forgiveness was if I forgive you, the behavior you're, acting out on, the way you're abusing me is okay. And that is not true
Mhm.
in any way, shape, or form. Or if I forgive you, you can continue to do it. Or if I forgive you, you're going to say, gosh, thank you. And you're going to suddenly, all your character defects and all your shortcomings and all your tendencies to be abusive are going to be gone, right? Like none of that's true. What forgiveness does and what it did for me was allow me to stop waiting for her to say, I'm sorry, or waiting for her to change, right? And so
Mhm.
I was able to lay my head down on the pillow at night with less anger, right? And I was able to just be at a little bit more peace. And I also had to take that forgiveness piece and, whatever your sense of spirituality is, whether it's God, Buddha, Larry from the convenience store, the tree down the street, or yourself, get with that and tap into that because that helped me through that forgiveness process as well. Larry from the convenience store is a great guy, right? So, and and then setting boundaries. It used to drive me crazy when people would say, set boundaries because I would come to my mom's house. I would have, like, my mother, she was being very well taken care of. She was like the princess. I was giving every dollar. I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. I was living day by day. Like it would be the 25th of the month, and I would have to figure out what I can sell today to be able to make my rent tomorrow. What I could sell today to be able to pay my gas, for my car to get to her house, right? It was day by day, never knew how that was coming. And so people would say, "Oh, you need to just set boundaries with your mom." And I would be as nice as can be. I would give, 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 and I would come over, and the things she would say to me were horrible. She would try to kick me out of her house sometimes, and that's not just because she was, you know, mentally and emotionally abusive. Now, you can have the most loving person in the world, right, be in your life. And once they start having medical challenges, whether it be Alzheimer's or things like that, they're losing their independence. And whether it seems like they are aware of it or not, they are aware. And so they're going to lash out. And it was very interesting because in one of my mom's more lucid moments, she said to me, "Tina, I'm really sorry about the way I treat you. But what happens is I get so angry about, my independence that I've lost, and I can't just go do stuff and I can't make decisions for myself. I get so angry and I have nowhere to put that energy, right? And you're the only one I can take it out on, and you'll keep coming back." And although that's a really messed up statement, it's true for a lot of them. So if you're caring for somebody, whether they were an abuser, for you or not, they're going to take that out on you at times, right? So and you cannot set boundaries with somebody who has cognitive issues. You cannot set boundaries. Like before, I used to say, "Mom, if you do this, I'll do this," and that worked really well, right? Well, now she's got memory issues, so I could say, "Mom, if you do this, I'll do this," and she could agree all day long, and 5 minutes later she's doing it again, because she forgot we had that conversation. So I had to learn how to set boundaries with myself. And
Mm,
even if that boundary was with myself, because I think sometimes when we're walking through grief and we're walking through tough emotions, like for me, I'll task, because emotions can't hit a moving target, right? And so I had to set boundaries with myself. Like after I had had a really tough time at my mom's and she was really abusive, like I have to spend this much time like staring at the wall or crying or whatever. Like I had to make sure I have to go to, even though I want to organize my bathroom because it makes it so I can't think, I have to go to a support group. I have to, instead of wanting to eat my emotions away, I have to drink a lot of water, and so, and I have to care for myself in that way, right? So I had to learn how to set boundaries with myself. And that's really hard for a caregiver when we've all of a sudden switched from, taking care of ourselves to taking care of somebody else and completely forgetting who we are.
yeah.
So even just finding the self-worth to think I'm
Mm,
worth me taking care of myself and caring for myself. And it is hard when it's a parental figure or somebody who was a husband or wife, because that's the person that you love the most and depended on the most and would go to with your problems. And now, you've got to be that for yourself as well. So it is a tough journey for, the caregivers who are out there walking through that. It was a tough journey for me. And but listen, we've all handled it like a champ.
yeah.
Even though we feel like we're failing, I hear these caregivers so many times tell their story, and how they feel like they're not doing a good job. And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you are amazing."
Mm,
And if somebody outside of you was telling
mm,
you the story about their care journey, you'd be like, "Wow, you are just a rock star. How do you do that?" Right? But it's you're doing that. We're doing things like learning how to do the Heimlich maneuver at 60
yeah.
miles an hour, and doing things like, how to live off of, very little money when we used to have a lot. So we're doing, amazing things. But yeah, it's definitely important for us to, set those boundaries and learn that the most important person to set those boundaries with is ourselves.
If you're caring for a difficult parent, then make sure you know the 5 powerful tips to help you care for them and stay sane. Grab your completely free copy here at apinemd.com/difficult parent. Yeah, I think that is brilliant because I think when a lot of people think about setting boundaries, they think about, oh, okay, if I set this boundary, if I tell mom she can't do this, then she has to change.
Right,
And
right.
that's not a boundary because you don't have control over what mom's gonna do.
Oh,
but the
and they get
boundary,
super obstinate too. Like,
yes,
oh, I'll show you. Yeah,
absolutely.
you tell me I need to drink my shake. That is exactly what I'm not doing today.
Right. And I think setting a boundary with yourself is actually one of the few things you do have control over.
Mhm.
Is you like, let's say you're going to mom's house and you know it's going to be a tough day. You know she's going to say mean things to you. She's going to criticize you all day long. And one of the boundaries you could set is like, okay, when I leave mom's house, I'm gonna just like sit at home for a little bit and cry, or I'm just gonna like watch Netflix for a little bit.
Right,
And
right,
that's my treat for
right,
myself to have
right.
made it through that day, you know?
Right, exactly. And we have to do that for ourselves.
Yeah.
It's definitely, not an easy journey. And some of the stuff we have to go through is tough. Like I remember one time it was a Tuesday, so that was a day that mom decided she didn't like me. And she loved the attention from other people when there was other people there. And I had scheduled a physical therapist to come in. Well, she didn't like that, right? She didn't like that the physical therapist was coming in, but she needed it, right? So she allowed the physical therapist to come in, but just so she could tell that physical therapist like how horrible I was. So I came in and I had to sort her meds, and she starts yelling at me, and I'm like, "Well, mom, I need to sort your meds. You're out of meds, right? And that's important." Well, she had an audience, so she's like, "I'm going to call the police." I'm like, "Okay, mom, you can call the police if you want, but I've got to sort your meds and then I will leave." Okay. And just dealing with things like that, and having to, and here's this physical therapist who knows nothing about me. And here's a senior citizen saying, "I'm going to call the police because you're in my house," and it's like, okay, all right. And so I had to sort the meds and be like, "Well, have a good day, mom." And, just leave. And then of course I've got to take some time for me.
Yeah.
Of course I've got to take some time for me. So,
I think that's such an important point. And then you also shared earlier that you actually followed your mom through hospice care. And
yes.
it wasn't, I know you mentioned this before, but it wasn't quite what you expected hospice to be. So
No.
can you tell us in what way, like what were you expecting from hospice and then what did you actually get?
Well, one of the first things I was expecting, because by this time my mother was in hospice. From 2017 until 2022, I was deep into, the care space. I was very well educated on the logistics of it all. I had had many end of life conversations with her. I had led end of life panels, and so I think all the knowledge in the world did not prepare me for I knew it had been coming. I mean, she only had 1% chance to live, in that first 30 days, and we had almost 10 years together, right? It didn't prepare me for it actually happening, it actually being the time, right? And I also thought that, because I was spending, like I said, at this time about $3,000 a month for sure, on her care. And so I thought that hospice was going to come in, and mom wanted to do hospice at home. I wanted her to do hospice at home. I thought that hospice was going to come in and, you know, give the care to her. And now I would save some money on caregiving. And that is not the case. They do the appointments, they do the case management. I thought they were going to administer the comfort meds.
Mhm.
That was not the case. That was incredibly traumatic for me to like have to give my mom the comfort meds, because let's be honest, comfort meds are basically a way for them to be comfortable enough for their body to let go to pass, right? And that was very traumatic for me, especially when she was in the end of life coma. And it was tough. My mind kept telling me, if you give her, I was supposed to give her 5 doses a day. And for like a week, I only gave her 3. And the case manager was like, "You need to give her all 5." And for some reason, I thought the 2 at night weren't important because nighttime she was sleeping, but she was sleeping anyways because she was in end of life coma for a week. And it took me a week to finally give her those 2 at night because I wanted to get out of being the person who gave her her last dose of
Mhm.
comfort meds, and that was the one that let her body pass. And logically, there is no other person who was going to do it. And I knew that, right? But I thought there was going to be a way I could get out of that, right? And there was just not. And I had to remember, I had to give myself a lot of grace on I might know everything logistically, but emotionally, I am just a woman whose mother is about to die. And so I had to do things like, which I'm so glad I knew about these resources. I hired an end of life doula. The end of life doula, I had been working with her for a while because the end of life doulas can come in, as soon as you get that diagnosis that somebody's life is terminal, we could work with them for 10 years, right? I had been working with her for a couple of years, um, just walking through some of the anticipatory grief. And she was so important that
Mm.
last month because she came anytime the hospice case managers or team came to like discuss some changes in the care plan or whatever, she would come and she would be there. And because I'm hearing it,
Right.
but all I'm hearing in my head is my mom is going to die and I'm not sleeping, right?
Right.
Because at any minute she could die. And
Right.
so I wasn't processing that. So she could be there with us. And then after they left, she was okay with explaining it to me 3 times,
Yeah.
and being there if I needed to text her or call her and say, now, what did they say again about this? And I was able to ask, her tough questions. And I also was able to have her sit down with the professional caregivers because my expenses went from $3,000 to $6,000 a month
Mm.
because I chose to bring in more family caregivers, CNAs from agencies and whatnot, so I could have time as a daughter with my mom, right? And so I had her sit down with all the staff that was coming in and out of the house, and professional or private, and answer questions like, what happens if, how do we communicate with her? Do we communicate when she's in that end of life coma? What do we do if we walk in and she's passed? What do we do with the body? You know what I mean? Like how, these are
So much
important,
of
weird,
it.
uncomfortable questions. And then I also had her come in. I had my siblings and their children come visit, and she sat down and asked and answered questions for the children were ages 13 up to my brother and sister who are at age 50, and answered those tough questions again. What do we say to mom? How do we say goodbye while she's here? What do we talk about? What kind of questions are okay to ask? What happens if we walk in and she's dead? Where
Right.
does the body go? Like, these are really uncomfortable questions. And she was able to answer it in a way that was as comfortable as can be for a 13-year-old to a grieving son who's 50. Um, so yeah, it was very different. It was Christmas time, and it was very quiet that last week. She was in that end of life coma. It was pretty much just me and her. And obviously I wasn't sleeping much because at any minute, she could pass. I wasn't showering, I wasn't really eating, you know, and it's interesting when she passed because we're going to talk about death. So anybody who's watching or listening, if this is uncomfortable for you or triggering for you, I would suggest just forwarding past this part, right? But the hospice team, when I asked that question, what happens when she passes, and they explained to me that you call them, some people sit with the body, and I was like, oh my God, I would never sit with a dead body, and when I came in, because I had gone upstairs, I'd given her the last dose of the two that I was supposed to give her at night. I'd given her the last dose of the comfort meds, and I went upstairs for a minute to rest, and then the professional caregiver came in. I said, well, let me check on my mom. And I went in there and she had passed. And I laid with the body for a little bit just because, it was important. And then as the hospice team came in and they cleaned her up and prepared her, and as they were taking her out on the gurney, I asked if I could have a minute with her, which was not a minute that I wanted. It's horrible to see your loved one in a body bag.
Yeah.
And I was able to stand by her and say one last prayer before she left the
Mm.
house. And it's shocking to go through that, right? And listen, anybody who's gone through that and and you're in that grieving phase, and people say, well, you should be happy she's in a better place. Listen, I can tell you, I am very happy my mother is not suffering. There were many times that I asked, again, God, Buddha, Larry from the convenience store, why? Why do you let her suffer? You
Mm.
know, why her quality of life isn't, she's so sad, and so I'm grateful she's in a better place. I was grateful she's in a better place. But again, on our caregiving journey, there are two of us.
Yeah.
On the end of life journey, there are two of us. So there's a person that is in a better place, and there's a person here on earth with a great loss that they're feeling. And it is not selfish for you to feel those emotions of loss. You can feel both grateful that they're in a better place and sadness that they are not with you anymore. So, anybody who's walking through that, please allow yourself that grace to have your own journey in that too. So,
I think that's such an important distinction to make, is not only to give permission for, is actually to give permission for yourself to feel what you're feeling.
right,
Um, because it is, the grief, honestly, it starts it starts when you become a caregiver,
right,
honestly, because you
absolutely,
start grieving the life you had, then you're grieving, like, the loss of this person that's in front of you and however long that takes, and then when they've actually passed, now you're grieving the fact that they've actually passed, and
right,
now you have to, what are you gonna do with your time? So that actually brings me to the next question, is that your caregiving journey has ended.
right.
Um, and you had dedicated almost 10 years to being a caregiver. So
Mhm.
how was that transition out of that role of a caregiver, which took up all of your time basically, to what has life been like now?
Well, first thing I want to say is I thought my caregiving journey had ended, but there are
Mm,
different phases to your caregiving journey. And the next phase of my caregiving journey was just beginning, and that's the caregiver recovery, right?
yeah.
And grief is very different from caregiver recovery. I was, in an odd way, I was fortunate enough that my father had passed about 7 months before my mother, and I was never his caregiver. And so I got to learn what grief alone was.
Mm,
Grief and caregiver recovery are two different things.
mm,
Making your way out of fight or flight mode that you've been in for 10 years, um, two different things, right? And so, putting yourself last so many times. Like, I remember I'd go to the doctors and they'd say, what's your date of birth? And I'd be like, oh, I'd give them my mom's, and then I'd give them my ex-boyfriends because they were so important, right? Everything was about them. And so, even just, I remember I went on a date, and this poor guy takes me out to this really nice dinner at this fancy restaurant. And all I can think, like, I'm sure he had a great conversation. I'm sure he had very, epic things to say. But the whole time I'm sitting there thinking, oh my God, I didn't have to drive my car in case I have to leave early. Oh my God, my phone is in my purse. I don't have to leave it on the table and check it, right? I'm actually at a restaurant where we can order something and sit and relax and have a conversation, not like just a 15-minute thing. I didn't have to pay like a bunch of money for caregivers to come out on this date. I can stay out as long as I want. So we're having two totally different experiences, right? And just simple things like that. And walking through that first time you buy yourself a cup of coffee, or the first time you buy yourself a new shirt, because for a while you had to put things on hold and everything was from Goodwill if you got something new, right? First time you get to go to a movies and not be on call. And first time you experience joy
mm,
is it is sad to experience that joy because you walk through that guilt. If I
mm,
should feel happy to be free,
yeah.
but my mother would want me to be happy. We talked about this, and I know exactly what she wanted,
Mm,
right? So it is definitely different. And just as in, my care journey, I became, and like many, spiritually, emotionally, financially, physically, mentally bankrupt. You know what I mean? Everything was a disaster. So in your caregiver recovery journey, what we're going to have to do is rebuild every single one of those areas of our life. We have to recover financially, quickly get our health back in order. I
Mhm.
had to make 1 million doctor's appointments because I knew the stats. Again, 30% of family caregivers pass within 5 years of the person that has passed that they're caring for, right? And I've heard so many stories of caregivers getting done with their care journey. They think they're going to, be less stressed and all. They start getting Bell's palsy. They start getting all of these things. Because your body has been all tense for so long. And the second there's been so much adrenaline running through your body for all these years of care. And then the second if your body survives that and you don't have a heart attack or a stroke in the middle of it, the second your body releases, some of those underlying medical conditions are coming up, right? And so I had to quickly put that as a priority, right? I had to quickly put, my mental health and my emotional health into a priority and do the grief therapy, even though there was caregiver recovery along with it. I had to do the trauma therapy through somatic therapy, right? Getting in touch with my body, because again, we're trying to get in touch with our health. And so it's a very, very different journey. My life today is very different. It's very different experiencing freedom. I am really, really allowing myself to find joy in the little things, like being able to. I remember I went on a hike for first time in 10 years,
Wow.
and my friend was very all about the hike and all about the destination. And I'm like, oh my God, the trees and the lake. And I'm having a completely different experience, right? Because everything's like beautiful, but just allow yourself some grace. Just as you, as a caregiver, did not know how to be a caregiver. You
Mhm.
can have all the training in the world, but caring for your loved one is going to be different because you're feeling the emotions too, right? And so allow yourself the grace to learn how to recover from your caregiver journey. Expect learning curves,
Mhm.
expect the unexpected in your emotions, redefine normal once again of what
Mhm.
life looks like, and allow yourself to keep redefining it as your life expands and you get more comfortable with not being in a caregiver role. But honestly, once you're a caregiver, you'll always be a caregiver.
Mhm.
That's always your identity. And it's something that I'm proud of, and something that all of us should be proud of, because we're the ones who stepped up and said, I love you in a way that we never knew how to love before.
Yeah. I think that's beautiful, and thank you so much for sharing that. I think that that recovery piece, almost what I'm hearing is that that caregiving experience, I think, for a lot of people is when it lasts or however long it lasts, right? Um, there is a trauma there. There
Oh,
is a
yeah.
trauma there that you have to like relearn how to do kind of the normal things, how to go out to dinner without feeling terribly stressed because you need to
Right.
have your phone right there just in
Right.
case like that call comes
Right.
in. And you have to kind of relearn to like relax a little bit because you can now. But that it takes time because you spent 10 years in that stressful panic, on call. You were on call
Right.
24/7 mode.
Absolutely. I had
Um,
to change my ringtone on my phone, and anybody who's walking through this, right? I
yeah,
suggest one of the first things you do is
yeah,
change the ringtone on your phone, because it was such a trigger every time the phone rang or my text went off. I thought, what's wrong with mom? What's wrong with mom? Or what's wrong with my ex? I need to be on call, right? And so I had to change my ringtone, and anybody now, I understand your first instinct is going to be change your ringtone to something that reminds you of the person who's passed. There are a million other ways you can be reminded of how they passed. This is something to help you get out of fight or flight mode and to
yeah,
stop being triggered a little bit. Change your ringtone to a song that makes you feel happy,
mm,
hopeful, or just, something funny. There are a million ringtones you can get, just something different,
yeah.
right?
I think that's so important because you're actually trying to you're moving forward, you will always carry that caregiving experience with you. You're
Right.
still working through it and that it doesn't just turn off like a switch, you know?
Oh,
It's
absolutely not.
actually a lot of work. You're almost 2 years from, I think, the time that your mom passed, and, you're still figuring it out,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and
right?
it's a journey, and it's okay for it to be a journey.
Yeah, I think that's so important. So what's your biggest piece of advice? I think we have shared so many, you have shared so many pearls in here, but what's your biggest piece of advice for a family caregiver who's in the thick of it, going through it?
My biggest piece of advice is find support, whether it be an online peer-to-peer support group, Facebook, Insta, whatever. Um, and also breathe
Mm.
and know that you're doing a great job. You really are doing a great job. You're handling things you've never handled before. It's okay. You're walking through a learning curve. So allow yourself to know, and if you can't remember that you're doing a good job, know that we think you're doing a great job. So the biggest thing is find that support, rely on whatever, again, your spiritual beliefs are. And again, I'm going to say, God, Buddha, Larry from the convenience store, the tree down the street, whatever it is, that's going to help carry you through these really tough learning periods. And most importantly, it's okay to continually redefine what your normal is.
I think that's a great, great kind of piece of advice. So where can we find you? And then you also mentioned something about a sea cruise, which I think
Yes,
everyone is going to want to
yes.
know about.
So I am on all the social media platforms. You can either look up Keys for Caregiving or Christina Keys, Keys. You can go to my website, which is christinakeys.com. You can also reach me by texting my community line, which is 360-230-7736. Or if you're interested in doing some self-care, we have something coming up called Self-Care at Sea. And you can go to funseas.com/self-care. It's a Norwegian cruise where you'll be able to spend time with people like myself, Elizabeth Miller from Happy Healthy Caregiver, the sisters from Confessions of a Reluctant Caregiver, the dementia diva, the Carrie. There's so many great people, the folks from AE Corner, Christina and Cindy. And it's a 7-day cruise through the Bahamas and places like that on this amazing ship, amazing ship. Everything's included. When you get on the boat, you'll be able to have, gift bags, and there'll be different events that we'll be having. You'll also be able to vacation. We're not going to take all your time doing and they're not boring classes. They're things like scavenger hunts and moonlight meditations and dance parties. So we're really going to teach you how to live self-care outside the box because
Mm.
we have so many weird ideas of what self-care is. We're going to make it fun, right? So you can go on my website and on social media and go to funseas.com/self-care. Sign up for that. There's some great deals. Norwegian has given us great discounted prices for people who are going to be on that cruise specifically. But I would love to see any of you and experience this wonderful cruise with you. Myself and many of the other folks in the care space are going to be on that cruise as well. It's going to be one big party and it's going to feel like one big family, and we're going to have a great time. We'd
I
love
think
to see.
that sounds incredible. And we will include the links to everything below. We'll include it in the blog. We'll definitely send you the links for that because that sounds like it is a fun time with a community that
Mhm.
gets what you're going through.
For sure. Yeah.
Um, and it's going to be about taking care of you and finding that joy again through the activities that you have planned, connecting with other people who get what you're going through, that maybe you can even chuckle and laugh a little bit about the
Right. Oh,
stuff
yeah.
you've seen too.
Right.
Um,
For sure.
and so I think that's incredible. That sounds amazing, honestly.
We'd
So
love to have you all join us. So,
So, Christina, thank you so much for sharing your story, being so honest and transparent about it. Um, I think there are a lot of people that are listening to this that are going through a hard time, and hearing their story in your story is going to make them feel a lot less alone. And for those listening, I will include the link so that you can reach out to Christina yourself and get to know her a little bit better and connect with her. So thank you so much. I know that reliving and retelling the story can be really, really hard. And there were times when I know you got tearful and I got a little dewy-eyed as well, just hearing you. But I do want to say that what you did for your mom was incredible.
Thank you.
I think it takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of strength, and all the caregivers that are listening to this, what you are doing for that person that you're caring for is incredible. And it is totally okay to take care of yourself at the same time and to make room for yourself. So Christina, thank you. Thank you so much.
So much. Thank you so much.
And with that, we're wrapping up another episode of Coffee with the Coaches, and I'll see you in the next video. Hey, if you're loving this conversation, then make sure to sign up for our weekly email newsletter. This is where we share inspiring stories, tips, and strategies so that you get the support you deserve. Sign up at epinemd.com/subscribe.